Welcome to the Binding Mind podcast. My name is Lorenzo Salazar.
And I'm Ian Spector. Let's jump in.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hey, Binding Minders. You're still stuck with me. Today's episode is brought to you by Ian's Interesting Facts. Did you know Fruit Loops are all the same flavor, regardless of their color? Who fact checks this? Enjoy today's conversation. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Binding Minds. Today, we've got two guests joining us, Calley and Caroline Petty. Calley serves as the creative production manager, and Caroline, the brand development manager, both for Bahama Bucks. Thank y'all so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having us.
So one of the things that I did learn, especially you, Caroline, with Ian, is that, you and Calley, y'all have a really close relationship there with Bahama Bucks, and you get the opportunity to get to know Ian really, really well. So I need to learn more about you both as well as our listeners, because we are very interested to see kind of what that dynamic is between you two, especially being there with Bahama Bucks. So we're going to do some 10 rapid fire questions, and then I'll have one more final question that you will have to answer and then perform.
Oh,
I'm kidding. You don't have to perform.
I'll perform mine.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, you'll perform yours. All right, you ready?
ready.
All right. For you both, coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Early bird or night owl?
I know what yours is.
I'm an early bird. Calley knows
Okay.
that.
I think I used to be a late bird, but now I'm just a bird. I want to just go to bed and sleep in. So
You wake up sleepy. Okay. Dogs or cats?
Dogs.
I have a dog, but I've decided that my spirit animal is a cat.
It's true.
Okay.
Fridays, Calley turns into a cat. She's just, nobody mess with her. She's done for the week.
I like how the whole office knows. The whole office knows, yeah, don't mess with her on Friday. Okay. What is one thing you can't live without?
I gotta have my Burt's Bees chapstick,
Ooh.
or I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not well. Gotta have that.
Yeah. Probably a snack. I find myself much like a 2-year-old if I don't have appropriate number of snacks throughout the day. So
Hangry rises. The
They
hangry
made
grew.
they made the Snickers commercials about you.
yeah.
What is your go-to comfort food?
I could eat mac and cheese every day, all day.
Great
Yeah.
choice.
I'm down with that.
Same. Yeah, mac and cheese, or we actually both really love trolley eggs.
Oh, yes.
I've never met really
Okay.
anybody else who loves the trolley eggs. I don't know if you've had them, but
They're hard to find.
they're hard to find, but we typically have bags of them in our desk.
There you go. That's what ties you two together. Trolley eggs. Summer or winter?
I'm a summer girl. All the way.
Man, I don't know.
Fall is an option.
Oh, okay. I mean, I feel like every season, it's once I'm in that season, then I'm okay, I'm ready for that next season. So,
Okay. I respect that. I'm kind of the same way. It's it's now hot. Now I want it to be cooler. It's now cooler.
Yeah.
Let's get spring going. So, okay. What is sweet or sour?
I'm probably sweet.
I think I'm sweet too. I'm
Okay.
sweet. Yeah.
Y'all are wrong. It's sour all the way. Just need
Yeah,
you to
I'm
know
kinda-
that.
I'm kind of a sour. What is one of your favorite stores?
I do.
Grocery
like
stores can be.
Oh,
Okay.
Oh,
I mean, I always find something at Anthropology.
I love HEB.
She does.
Okay.
And everybody in Lubbock or in our office here has made fun of me because I had been talking about HEB for years. I just think as a brand, they are outstanding. They do things better than any other brand in their industry. And when they came to Lubbock, they should have paid me a commission because I talked about it
You're
for
a huge
years.
advocate for them.
Yeah.
That's funny. And are you originally from Lubbock?
I'm originally from
Okay,
Dallas.
gotcha. So
Which
then
we
that makes a
didn't
lot
have,
of sense.
yeah, and we didn't have HEB in Dallas. We had Central Market, but
Okay.
I'm an Aggie, so my first introduction was HEB in College Station.
We don't use the A word in this pod. No, I'm just
No,
kidding. I'm kidding.
We're gonna have
keep
to
it on
bleep
the
that one
DL.
out.
I don't want people to start
Totally.
me.
Well, we did know, but no, we're just giving you a hard time. I mean, you know us fellow Red Raiders have to do that. Uh, well, and then I think I know your question now, Caroline, on this next one: city life or country life?
I'm a city girl all the way. I mean, I can appreciate the country, but I love to live in a city.
I'm city too. Yep.
Gotcha. See, I'm probably more country just because I came from a 1A school, small town, calm, peaceful. So Lubbock's like my Houston and Dallas, so that's as big as I'm going. And then the last question for this rapid fire is, what is your favorite way to relax after a long day? Now, I might need to put into this question because speaking with Ian, and this is if, let's say, the kids are not around.
I was gonna say go to bed. Like,
Yeah.
And think about it. It's like you're stressed. It's not really time for bed. What would y'all do?
I've recently been I love reading and I've always loved it. And so I'm trying to be more intentional about reading. And I find that a really great way to unplug my mind, especially now that the weather is a little bit nicer in Lubbock. If I can read for about 30 minutes on our back patio, that's
Very soothing.
Yeah, pretty magical for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
What is relaxing? I don't know anymore because I have all these grand plans like before the kids go down and I'm like, okay, I'm going to do all of these things once they go to sleep. And then they go to sleep and I'm like, I just crash into the couch and cannot do anything. But I think, we do just try to get ahead for the next day. And I know that sounds boring, but it's huge for us because then the next morning, like a cat, I'm not really a morning person either. So I'm just kind of like, let's do this. So I think just trying to get ahead for the next day, packing snacks, and no, that's not really relaxing.
For Caroline?
It could be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Honestly,
Exactly, Caroline.
depending on the meetings we have, she might pack me a little snack.
I think in our world today, it's like we're just pretty much stressed day around. If we're not stressed, and we're stressed about not being stressed, we're stressed about being stressed. So it's an ongoing cycle. And the next question, which is kind of leading up to the questions we have lined up for y'all. What would be your karaoke song, your go-to karaoke song? You're gonna say it and then perform it for 10 seconds, and then we'll take turns.
No way.
Yeah, no.
I would be probably in like an old school Britney Spears, like Oops, I Did It Again, Baby One More Time.
Yeah.
Crazy because it's like since third grade, that was like my first CD. So I know those words.
Did you have that what's the little chip deal where you just push the button, it had like the insert and it played the music? I forget what they're called.
Pre-MP3s.
Yeah, it's like that's what I think of is that was one that came up to that song. What about you?
Oh, I don't know. I was going to say something like Shania Twain or some good country, you know what I mean? Like that just, it has to be a really familiar song for me, something that makes me feel, to get me up there singing on a stage. Or maybe like some Fresh Prince. I'm a like 90s kid, so
yeah.
That thing all the way through.
I would probably go with Pretenders by Foo Fighters. I don't know. That song's always like gets the people going. It's fast tempo.
I didn't see that coming.
Didn't want you to. That's a spontaneous. What about you, Ian?
Ignition remix.
Totally can see that.
Yeah, usually I don't do this, but let me break you off a little preview of the remix. Yeah, that's me for sure. I don't know why I sang it since college. So I don't even need the screen.
A nice little party starter for you, huh?
Yeah, there's a video of me that my wife took of me singing that when we were on our honeymoon to, I don't know, 200 strangers. Like,
Nice.
yeah, I don't, that's hopefully that fell off her phone when she got a new one, but I don't know. It's somewhere, I'm sure.
I'll ask Sydney try to retrieve it so we can just add it to this when this goes live.
Perfect.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, thank y'all so much for being great sports about it. We just definitely want to have fun and learn a little bit more about y'all. But leading into the serious questions, I'm very interested to learn about what sparked y'all's interest into coming into this field with franchising and Bahama Bucks.
Well, so I started out as an interior design major in college, and I then decided that I was going to go the advertising route. So I always knew I wanted to do like something creative, but I mean, no 18-year-old really knows what they want to do. So then I started doing advertising and I liked it, but then I quickly discovered like I want to do the actual like making of the ads. And so then that led me to graphic design. So I kind of see how my points lined up there. But then, yeah, I just this was my first job out of college, honestly. I started the weekend after I graduated. So I got really lucky in that aspect.
Wow.
And
That's awesome.
I've been here ever since.
Yeah, it was definitely different for me. I was actually a political science major. Ian knows that. At A&M. And when I think about it now, it's so interesting to me because the thing that drew me to political science was I was fascinated with the social science side of why people make the decisions that they do and what influences them and how you influence them. And that was really what I loved about my degree and the early parts of my career. And then it actually made transitioning into marketing in lots of different kinds of industries a very seamless transition. That is still what I love about my job now is understanding what's important to people, why it's important, and how you can, influence that behavior in a way that creates a memorable experience for them.
Which I've got a ton of insider knowledge on Caroline's history, and she moved a bunch. Her husband was in the Army, and so like Caroline's marketing experience is pretty vast. I mean, like the Little Trees Company when they were in New York, Justin Boots, and so like she's well rounded in marketing, which I think is super cool. Like because those take such different marketing approaches to them because of the products and what is actually being pushed. And so a little bit unfair, but I figured it was worth sharing.
Yeah. I was afraid about what you were going to say. You said I have a lot of insight on Caroline, and I was like, I got insight on you too, man.
Details. Let's see what's going on.
That's for a different podcast.
That's funny. How was it like out there in New York? I mean, do you notice as far as like the industry goes with marketing? I mean, I'm sure it's a whole different type of demographic, different type of messaging, and just fast pace. Was that experience very overwhelming at the moment?
It was. So I lived I was about to say, what was it like? It was cold. It was mostly cold. We actually just so fortunate the way, things kind of worked out. We were stationed like 30 miles south of the Canadian border. So outside the city, like New York City. And that's where the Little Trees car freshener brand was based. And so, but it is an international brand. It is the #1 automotive air freshener outside of the US and obviously in the top, top performing in that category inside the US, but it was really fast paced. It really opened my eyes to just a lot of the different aspects within marketing and got to work with really amazing people that taught me a lot. And that certainly, is very different from working in the fashion industry. And I went from a consumer packaged goods for a $3 item to a $300 item of, pair of boots. And so certainly very different consumers, but the principles I think translate. And then that translates all the way into Bahama Bucks, right? Like this is food and beverage, which is also very different. But at the same time, those kind of founding principles, guiding principles of understanding who the consumer is, what's important to them, and how your product intersects them in a meaningful way. That tends to stay true regardless of the industry that you're in.
Definitely. I think that's the insight that is the coolest for me is Lorenzo and I have been in print for so long that not that like we try to do a good job of remembering that like what we do here and the way we market and the way that we support our clients and our partners isn't different than essentially the way you guys do it. At its finish point, the pieces that we put out are different, but at a foundational level, it's not. And so I guess with that being said, is there something for both of y'all that surprised you about Bucks when you started?
I feel like I was surprised by just how lean of a team Bahama Bucks corporate office was and just the amount of things that go into the entire system. And I think like marketing specifically, what surprised me was just like one decision, there's this big trickle down effect. And so I think like keeping that in mind, that we're scaling this across, at the time, almost 10 years ago, it's like 70 shops and now it's 114 shops. And, so, I mean, there's always this scalability factor where it's like, when you're making a decision, it's like, it can't just work for one shop. It's got to work for everybody and it's got to kind of stand the test of time. And so there's like a lot more impact, I guess, on your decisions than just like, yeah, sure, let's let it go, which we still,
sometimes that happens.
So we're still learning this.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things that blew my mind when I came and worked for a franchise, and what's so different about a franchise, specifically a franchise system, this still kind of blows my mind, is that in my past life, you might develop a product and then you'll spend a solid year selling that into Walmart or Target or wherever it might be. And a year after your product is fully developed and launched, you actually might see it on some shelves. And by the time the consumer experiences it, that product is many years old and you have already other products that have been released. So I was really, and that's the same for, the fashion industry, retail as well. Like you develop a product and then selling that product in is a huge first part of, before it ever even gets to the consumer. And I was just blown away when I came and worked for a franchise because we will develop a product and have 100% distribution immediately. And that's crazy for me to think about. The fact that you can develop a product and it doesn't mean that step of really getting buy-in from the franchisee, because you might have distribution in their shop, but the franchisee really buying into the product is important to make sure it's presented well to the consumer, right? You could launch something and it do nothing if the franchisee doesn't see the value and understand it. But the fact that we can have 100% distribution across the entire country with literally the push of a button is amazing to me. I think that's one of the big advantages of the food and beverage industry and franchising, especially, is that you kind of eliminate one of those really big barriers to getting distribution for your product.
Is that a pretty common myth, I guess, in the franchising industry? Because I would have never expected that. Like I would have expected the product releases and the buy-in to really kind of, I guess, mirror some of those other industries that you talked about.
Yeah, I know for me, I just had never even considered that part of it. I think I was so used to, because so many other industries, almost any other industry, that's how it works, because technically our franchisees are our distributors. Those are our retailers. But because they've purchased and bought into a franchise family specifically, they're, legally obligated to carry the full, national menu. Though there are some maybe customizations for some items or pricing or things like that. But it was just mind blowing to me, and still is really amazing to me, that you can develop a product and then every guest experience it on the same day. You know, that's a really hard thing to do. Is you may have, if you're developing maybe a, you know, air freshener or whatever it is, you may have some consumers in one market that start to experience it, and then internationally it's years later. And so it's really amazing that we can develop products, and then when done really well and we bring the franchisee along appropriately through that process, the fact that consumers across the country can start experiencing that all in the same day is so cool and exciting to me.
So you mentioned distributing it to all the franchisees and having a product that will work with everybody and it's distributed the same day. That to me tells me that, within your group, you have strengths and traits that have allowed your team to develop that type of, what's the term, the development of it to flow. I'm sure it doesn't flow smoothly, but it works for everybody. So what would you say are some strengths and traits within your company or within your team that you've noticed has helped you execute all these different campaigns and new products?
For me personally, and I use this analogy a lot, to make sure that you have like all of your ingredients before you start making the cake. Especially from like a creative standpoint, we're kind of the last leg of the relay, to get handed the baton, where everybody else has kind of figured out their goals and objectives and, the hierarchy and all the things. And then it gets passed off to us. And then there's just going to be some things that get missed. And so just us being able to go back and forth of like, hey, so is this going outside? Hey, what are the dimensions for this? Hey, how long does this need to live? Who's looking at this? Things like that determine the outcome. And so I just always hone in on like making sure I have everything before I get started on it. Cause it's a time waster, honestly. When you start working on something, you're 90% done, you show it. I talk to Caroline or our director, and then they're like, oh, wait a minute. This is a non-negotiable. It has to be this way. And then you're like, well, if I would have known that from the beginning, we would have taken this approach or would have, And so just making sure that those conversations are had and that you've got a clear brief and objectives before you start anything is huge. And we've had to learn those things the hard way. And some of those things are never going to be perfect. But that's my 2 cents.
Yeah. I think on the strategic side of marketing, of thinking about, kind of what Calley talked about as the business objectives and all of that, I think it's so important to be naturally curious. I go back to, what really drew me to marketing in the first place is asking questions of like, why does this matter to somebody? Like, how does this intersect them in a meaningful way? And I think the temptation, I know for me, can often be of like, well, we know, like we have the answer, we know. And I think being naturally curious and open to asking those questions and continually like learning about it helps you understand those really innovative things, like innovative insights about the guests never just randomly happen or you just had a good night. They really come from a deep understanding of who the guest is and being diligent about learning about them and the things about their life that are maybe not even connected to what your product or brand is that are influencing the kinds of decisions that they make. So, and I think that is really helpful when a project finally moves into the creative process, is we've answered, if we've done our job correctly on the strategic side, is we answered a lot of those questions about this is why this is important, that this is stated here on this piece of media as opposed to here because of how the guest is going to receive that, or, where they might be in the shop or whatever it might be. Those questions and asking those curious questions really help us equip the creative team to do their best work. They can always create something that looks great, but something that really resonates with the consumer. That happens when we've asked those questions, to Calley's point, on the upfront, and we've had those conversations. And the creative team, it kind of works both ways, because they will challenge us to maybe think about some of the things that we overlooked previously once they finally get to the creation side. So I would just say, I think being naturally curious and a learner is super important in marketing.
Something that I'm hearing in all of this, though, is like everybody within your organization also needs to be at least open to a long-term plan. And I say long-term because it's not just about R&D. We'll use them for an example. It's not just about R&D. R&D needs to think about placement and type of media and all of these things as well, because of those questions you guys have to have. And so if people aren't on the same page in that aspect, when R&D sends something down and it goes through you, Caroline, and then it gets to Calley, and Calley's like, well, are we billboarding this? Are we, is this a mailer? Are we doing shirts? What? And they're like, well, I don't know. I just think it's a cool product. And, like to Calley, to your point, like you essentially start over. And so, and I think you guys operate in an interesting space. And so something we haven't brought up is that Bahama Bucks corporate franchise is both a franchise office, but the corporate office actually owns stores. And so creating content for stores that you guys both own corporately, but are also owned by your franchisees, I guess, what does that team look like? Calley, you mentioned, you guys operate lean. So like what does the team look like?
Yeah. So I'm glad you asked that question. Even, to your point, Ian, about how many teams it touches at Bahama Bucks, is that I think ultimately the most important thing, whether we're developing something for a local shop, whether we're doing it for a franchisee, whether it's a national campaign or a local campaign, is alignment on the objective. It doesn't matter if you're in operations. It doesn't matter if you're R&D, if you're the creative team, if you're the warehouse. Whatever it is that there has to be alignment on what the business objective is. If marketing is focused on increasing guest frequency, and that's what our business objective is, but maybe R&D is focused on increasing the average ticket, it will end up being a mess. There has to be alignment from all teams on what the business objectives are first, and then each team is equipped then, whether it's operations or R&D or whatever it is, to then execute on that within their realm of influence and their role with alignment. And so I think, again, so to the point of if our objective is to increase guest frequency, right? We want guests to be coming back more often in a shorter period of time. That's going to influence what kind of product we develop. It's going to influence the way we're going to talk about it. It's going to impact where it's placed within the shop. It's going to change how we talk to operations about it, and how operations is going to train our avalanche crews or talk to our franchisees about the value of this, what it's going to mean for their shop AUV. And if we're not talking about it the same way internally, then we're absolutely not going to be talking about it consistently and in the same way to our end consumer. And so it is really valuable for us to have corporately owned shops here because it gives us some insight into the way things truthfully can just break apart by the time it gets to what I would say the retail or the shop level. If there isn't really clear alignment, you can develop something that is amazing and looks great, but if the crew is not well equipped to talk to the guest about it the right way, and coming from the insights that we've learned, then it's never going to do anything. We may have 100% distribution on a product or something like that, but if the franchisee doesn't buy into it, they don't understand the value of it, if operations doesn't understand how it's going to impact the shop and how to set that up for success, how the crew needs to talk about it, then it really is just going to fall flat. And you're never really going to see the impact of those projects. Is just ultimately what we're trying to do. We want to have impact. We want to do projects with impact. And so I think marketing, because we touch so many different departments and we're looking at what it looks like at the shop level, but also internally, ultimately holds a lot of the responsibility for alignment on those objectives from the very beginning. And I think that's one of the great things about marketing, is that it's a big player at the very beginning of the product process of understanding what kind of product to develop, all the way to actually developing the piece of media that's going to sit in the shop that the guest is going to see. So it really is a very multifaceted, kind of problem, but ultimately alignment on those objectives, business objectives, is so important for every team to be able to do their best work and make it make sense for the consumer.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think
I
back
guess
to
that,
like
okay.
the cake analogy is it's like we've got to know from a creative standpoint a lot of these pieces too, so that we know, like, is the crew seeing this piece? Is this something that needs to be branded? Is it just informational? Do we need to make these points really easy to read because they're referencing it when they're talking to a guest? Or, there's just a lot of factors that go into design decisions. And so I think, like, back to Caroline's point about objectives, as long as everybody's in alignment on those things, we can make and execute the best product possible.
Listen, Calley, it's close enough to lunch that using cake over and over, you're kind of making me.
It's making me
I
hungry.
know, I'm sorry.
This is my snack
No,
time.
it's all. We're gonna take an intermission so that Caroline can have her snack.
We'll meet y'all at Nothing Bundt Cakes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that kind of goes into my next question, kind of talking about the objectives and making sure everybody understands. So I'll kind of make this a two-part question because I know, Calley, your challenges and setbacks will look a little bit different than what Caroline's would be. So in your case, when you kind of hit a wall with graphics or design or trying to come up with what the concept look will be, how do you overcome that? Do you kind of sit back a little bit and just kind of come back to it the next day, or what does your research look like when you kind of hit those walls?
I mean, I think honestly, and I know, like, we keep talking about briefs and project briefs and those objectives. But I really think, like, sometimes when I get off on something, it's because I'm not clear on those objectives, because we could make something look really great, but if it's not talking to the right person or it's not serving those needs or solving that problem, then it's just bad design. And so I think, like, talking to Caroline again or referring to the brief of, like, really what's the problem that this is trying to solve really gets you back in alignment of kind of, okay, what are we trying to do? Who are we talking to? What is the things that we need to focus on? I think that also just kind of recalibrates and, brings things back in. And I think, kind of like I mentioned, the creative team's kind of the last leg of the relay. And so I think holding everybody accountable to their deadlines, because, if we get handed the baton last and they've already missed their deadlines and they're like, it's blown, so it's kind of,
sorry, figure it out.
Yeah.
And so I think just also being realistic that there's going to be some compromise on some things. There's going to be a backup plan for a plan B, a plan C, plan D, and so I think just being flexible on some of those things and just what's realistic, you have to go in knowing that is a very big possibility most of the time.
And do y'all have certain... Oh, go ahead.
Raise your hand if you've asked a creative team for something in 24 hours.
Raise your hand if the creative team has asked you for something in 24 hours.
We're not that bad.
No, it's like 30. It's like 30.
My record is 4 hours. What's yours, Ian?
Man.
I can't say longer than that. Then you look better than me. 3 hours and 59 minutes.
Like, hey, I can print it on my personal printer over here, but that's about it.
No, I just laugh whenever it's like, when do you need it? Great. And then it's,
right.
Let's say I tell them a 10-day turn time, and then they say, well, I know I was supposed to get this to you 5 days ago, but we can still do it, right? Okay, thank you. Here you go.
You're like the actual last of the relay, right?
Yes.
Like,
yeah, I mean,
we're
look,
the cleanup crew. We clean up the hurdles
of the project,
and all that stuff.
No, I'm just kidding. Well, and my question to follow up with that, Calley, is do y'all have certain, like, team meetings set in place weekly or per campaign? I mean, how does that look like for y'all's team?
I feel like it fluctuates just depending on what the project is. I mean, honestly, it's a good and bad thing that our office is really open. It's an open concept. We're in our director's office because he's the only one with a door on his office. So, which is great because it's like we really can just pop in or yell across the office and be like, hey, what did you mean by this? You know, and kind of just have those brainstorm sessions as we need to. But as far as like a structured meeting, we probably need to get back to doing some things like that. But we do like definitely have a meeting before we're going to start a project to get aligned on the project brief and just what all that scope is and what it's all going to entail and things like that to make sure we're all clear before we start anything.
I think it's been really helpful. We have like a project that we're working on right now that's like, it's going to be a multi-year reoccurring thing. And one of the things that we've done a little bit differently that I think has been really good is involving the creative team at the very beginning. Like before we're even talking about, okay, here's the creative brief, we're talking about the project scope. Having the creative team a part of that conversation allows them to say, well, that's going to take a lot longer to develop versus this one. Or how do we need to prioritize some of these things just because they have a different perspective? And so I think that's one of the things we've started doing, but I hope that we do more of and better is including the creative team actually in the strategic part of the conversation at the very beginning.
Yeah, and it seems to me that the communication has been the big key overall to help with the challenges and setbacks because, as you mentioned, if you don't get the full information, then that just kind of sets roadblocks as the production of the campaign goes about. So, and I know a lot of times many of our listeners kind of get frustrated in that process because you only know partial or there's still some decisions to be made on certain campaigns. And that just causes delays, causes headaches, just a lot of ambiguity within the project itself. And so my question to you, Caroline, is, and I know we took a little bit longer on this, but they're giving great information.
I'm about it.
Well, one of the things is getting all the franchisees on board and to fully understand what it is you're trying to execute. Are there, and I'm sure there has been many challenges within doing so because, again, in their end, they're getting the product, getting whatever kitting information that you're providing them. Are there certain steps that you do when you do send kits out to franchisees just to make sure everybody is fully aware and what the messaging is and what the campaign entails?
Yes. And this is something that I think we've really learned and improved over, the past 5 or so years. And one of the things that, thinking about the franchisee as our retailer, and while, yes, they may receive the product and automatically have it on their menu, we really want their buy-in. And so that process starts pretty early. And one of the things that we've incorporated for our own sake, but also for the franchisee's sake, is we just want to be really diligent about test markets. And that does 2 things for us is obviously it allows us to learn about the consumers, the guest reaction to something, how we can make some changes. It's one of the great advantages of a franchise system is we actually get to test things in market a lot more easily and less for less. It could be really expensive to do that kind of consumer research in different industries. But I think in a franchise system, we can really execute that a lot easier. So it's a huge advantage for us on the early front as far as learning before we're doing something system wide. But it also puts us in a position to, one, come to a franchisee and not make speculative claims about something, but actually say, hey, this is what this is going to do for your business. This is what it's intended to do. Here's how it's actually doing that. And oh, by the way, we'd love for you to hear from some of your peers, some of your franchise family about how it's done that for them. And so we really look at our franchisees as actual partners for us. They're not just the franchisee that's then going to have this product or whatever might be in their shop, but these are really our partners. And so we want to make sure that it makes sense for them, but also they become the advocates for us among our franchise family of like, man, I'm telling you what, like, we implemented this menu in our shop 6 months ago, and this is what it's done. It's improved our operations. It's improved, our average ticket significantly, whatever it might be. And so that process for us, I think, starts really right at that, those test markets that we do, but then also making sure that we're working really closely with the operations team, because there's so much that has to happen as far as communicating with our avalanche crews, right? Like ultimately we may create something, but there's probably going to be a 16 or 18-year-old that is not only making that product, but actually talking to a guest about it. And so working with our operations team early in the process to understand what those hurdles and pain points are for them, how we can bypass some of those, and what is the best way for us to communicate that. I mean, from a marketing standpoint, right, we have all of the strategic insight and whatever, but we need to boil it down for a 16-year-old to be able to execute that well in a shop in 2 minutes with a guest. And so working, really leaning on our operations team becomes a really important part of that process for us as well, early in the process, to make sure that the way it translates is not corporate marketing speak, but it's relevant to our avalanche crews and actually makes their life easier too.
Mm-hmm.
I want to shamelessly plug something. We've talked a lot of hypotheticals as far as the process and how you guys are fluid and transparent in how you operate. Things don't always go the same way they've gone before, but it's for the purpose of learning and being flexible. Shameless plug, by the time this drops, you guys should, knock on wood, have a huge LTO limited time offer that has hit stores, hit your locations with Sonic the Hedgehog. So that's super exciting.
Yeah.
You guys were telling me that you're one of 2 organizations that have an LTO with Sega on that.
Yeah. So we're the only dessert concept that is going to be doing a collaboration this year with Sega, and in the food and beverage industry, one of 2, along with McDonald's. So we are super pumped.
Wow.
To get to do. It's been a huge process. It's been a very long time in the making for sure. But yeah, it's going to launch at the beginning of May and run all the way through the summer. And so we're super pumped to get to work with such a cool brand like Sega, and such a, Sonic's just really interesting because it's not only super popular right now with young consumers and our core consumer, those younger kids. I have a 6-year-old that's obsessed with Sonic the Hedgehog. And so certainly our target consumer. But Ian, as you know, I'm also married to a 36-year-old that's obsessed with Sonic the Hedgehog because he grew up playing with it. And so it's really a heritage brand that aligns really well with Bahama Bucks. And we talk about making memories in our shops. And so the thought of parents getting to relive some of their favorite childhood memories with their kids through Sonic the Hedgehog in a Bahama Bucks shop is going to be an incredible experience. It's been really fun to work on.
Calley,
did y'all get the?
I was going to say, Calley, from a marketing design standpoint, how has that been different working with such a
big brand?
Yeah.
It's been good. We've done some other partnerships before with brands where we've had to obviously get their assets and get their brand books and, get their guidelines and all of those things, and then send everything back for approval. But you always know how serious these brands take their brand by their guidelines that they send over. And just a lot of things that we've learned about Sonic that a lot of people don't know, but it's very important to them. And I really respect that. And so, it's definitely part of the process, and there is some, I wish that we could say we have full creative license, to do whatever we want. But, we have to keep their brand in mind and have them approve things, and just, like I said, with some compromise stuff, there's some things that they're particular about. And so we just, have to abide by those things. And so, but it's been great. We've gotten to do, it's like a true collaboration where we've gotten to incorporate our brand as well into Sega's Sonic brand. And so it's been fun.
Yeah.
We're ready for it to come to life now.
So was the setup all through Zoom, or did y'all get to go to headquarters, or what was all that just kind of through email?
with that.
I didn't know the process. I was like, that would have been really, really cool. I
It would
mean,
have been
It would have
cool.
been our R&D team, which
Mhm.
the director of marketing is also a part of our R&D team, which is great. They actually got to meet with the Sega team, the Sega team here in the States
Mhm.
at a licensing expo. And so they got to interact with them
That's
face
cool.
to face. Yeah, which is really cool. And kind of got to pitch the brand and why it makes sense and did a great job with that. And then from there, just a lot of, Zoom calls and communication back and forth with their team. So they're a really talented team. And then also working with the Japan team. So that's been wild too, that I'm that's a huge part of talking about challenges is that every piece has to go to Japan for approval and be retouched by those designers and things like that. So it's definitely been a really big scope. The scope of the project has been really big.
Calley, a point
oh,
you
that's
made.
really cool.
Sorry, just a quick touch for all you creative directors, creatives out there that struggle with how robust and intricate your brand guidelines are. It can never be too intricate and too robust because it's your brand and you need to be proud of it and you need to protect it.
Yep, 100%.
I mean, who knew there was so many different shades of blue? I'm sure by the time you had to work on certain designs with Sonic and then the shoe late. I mean, so much detail that goes into that.
Yeah,
For sure.
Well, so with this campaign going on, what are some of the significant trends and development that you see currently within your industry?
I mean, I think for me, it's going to be hard to ignore like AI and some of the developments there. I mean, I don't think that it's ever going to replace a creative, somebody that like is actually the problem solver and thinking strategy wise. But it is a good tool, and it is. I mean, I feel like we're always looking for efficiencies, and so, I mean, there's been several things with AI and some of the beta testing stuff that's going on with Adobe programs that would require us to do a full photo shoot. If we we're showing a hand like this holding a snow and it's like, oh, I don't really want this sweater to be gray. Let's make it coral. I mean, now it's like it can do that for us. Or if like if the hand gets cut off, it can like fill in the rest of the hand for us. I mean, it's just wild things like that it's like, that would have been a whole nother photo shoot. And we literally click a button. So it saved us a few times. But it's great. I mean, I feel like it's a good tool to utilize. I'm all about efficiency, so it's hard to ignore that one.
Well, and I think for the most part, I think with the creative side of things and AI, with you being a creative director, y'all mentioned a lot about experiences, impact, the emotional interaction, the connection with that. So as great as AI is, I mean, it's pretty cool that you can just say certain things in Adobe and it creates it, but I still believe it still needs that emotional interaction feel to it. And so from what I know, robots are not emotional. So
no.
What are you
Yeah,
saying?
I would totally agree. I even at like a lot of conferences this year too, and talking about the hospitality industry, but I think probably would apply across any industry is that to Callie's point, like all of these technology is growing faster, more all the time. But really they're just tools to help us connect with our guest in more meaningful ways. So if you can leverage a robot to make the product so that your crew member can actually go talk to the guest, that's a huge advantage. Or if you can leverage AI to, process data about consumer buying trends faster and how to create communication and things like that for them, then that's a huge advantage. But it never, to your point, is going to replace the human interaction. It should just open up more time and energy to give for that kind of human interaction with your guests, especially in the hospitality industry.
I think that's super cool. I love to know like what's coming. We talked this season. We talked with Caden. He mentioned he mentioned that the things he focused on were the things that he really knew nothing about. And so he talked a lot about AI, he talked about that kind of stuff. And so I find the trends and developments and how they play into what we currently do wildly interesting. We could have a whole other podcast on that if we really wanted to. So the final question, which everybody gets asked, it's going to be a two-part for you guys. And so what is a piece of advice that you will never forget? Followed up with, what is a piece of advice you would give to someone interested in starting in the franchise field?
I think for me, so my dad told me, I don't know, a long time ago, maybe in high school, he just told me, run your own race. I feel like and still do, I think a lot of us spend our times looking around at other people and what are they doing? What should I be doing? And, when really your race is going to look different from a lot of different people, and how you get to the end result. And even if you get to that end result, that might change along the way too. And it's interesting that my dad said, run your own race, because we were swimmers growing up, but that's a technicality. Because in swimming and running for sure too, it's going to slow you down when you're looking at the people next to you. And so just focus on what's ahead and what's in front of you and what makes sense for you. And, stop comparing yourselves to other people and how they're getting there, because that may not work for you. That may not be your path.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a boss for me who was the brand manager when I worked for Car Freshener on the Little Trees brand. And there were so many things that I got the opportunity to touch, different projects. And he would frequently tell me, like, never miss an opportunity to add a tool to your toolbox. Like, just look at everything that you're going to touch as an opportunity to add another tool to your toolbox. And you never know, you may not use it, in this part of your life or this position or job. But I think looking back on that advice, I didn't strike me as valuable as it really was now looking back, because I've seen so many little tools or things that I didn't think were really relevant or that important for my job become really, really valuable to me later in life. Being able to kind of pull those out of my toolbox and be like, oh, I actually can do that, or I know how to do that, has been really, really valuable to me. And so I think that's one of the things that, especially as we have like interns coming in or new people that are, starting to work in the industry, is just look at every little, even annoying thing that you have to do as an opportunity to learn and add those tools to your toolbox, because you will definitely need them later, and it'll put you head and shoulders above the people around you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think from somebody getting into the industry or in our fields, I would say from my perspective, just that the brand is going to be the boss, and that that consistency aspect, it's hard. It's easy to lose sight of it because we see it all day, every day. We're like, we are tired of teal and coral. Like, everybody has got to, caught on to these things by now. But I mean, the reality is our guest, is visiting our shop, roughly 1.5 times a month. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, if they go to the website, if they download our app, if they receive a teacher appreciation postcard, if they get a mailer, all of these things should quickly say that it's Bahama Bucks and should have the same look and feel. And so I think just valuing your brand and, always coming back to that piece of it. And, if it needs to be revisited, if there is a piece that we need to bring into the brand or relook at, but just always keeping it top of mind.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. I think that's, it is, to Calley's point, like, we get really tired. We see it all the time. And the temptation is that, like, this isn't new and exciting anymore, but keeping in mind the end consumer and how they're experiencing something is really important. But I think for me, I would say too is, and this would be super important in like a franchising system, but really I think any industry is like, don't forget who your first actual maybe consumer is. The temptation is to think about just the end consumer, but the reality is that first, before you're doing anything, you're talking about internal buy-in. It has to make sense from a business side for, your executive team, your operations team, the warehousing team. Don't lose sight of making sure you're doing your due diligence to work with those teams, present it well to them. And then eventually your franchisee. It's so important that the franchisee really believes in what they're doing. They understand why, and there shouldn't be any less time and energy given to creating the tools and resources for the franchisee as for the end consumer. And so I think just keeping in mind like who you're actually speaking to first and not jumping just to the end consumer, because the end consumer is really going to love whatever it is that you're producing when each of those individuals along that kind of development timeline are able to create it in a way that makes sense for the consumer. We don't often get the face-to-face with the consumer, so making sure that we develop it with the franchisee in mind and are focusing on them as partners first is a super important piece.
Those two are really good advices, and we really do hope that one of many of our listeners that are thinking about coming into that field take that into consideration. I know from Ian and mine's perspective, I mean, we tend to just see the product and be like, we don't realize what all goes into it. So the fact that of everything y'all have explained, that really does give a great perspective of all the hard work, time, effort, stress. I'm sure a lot of back and forths that y'all are unsure about or that your team's unsure about, and the final execution to it. It's really cool to learn about that. And I hope that one of our listeners, takes that into consideration when they're looking to come into an industry like what you're in. So thank y'all so much for providing that information. And y'all are pros. Yeah. I mean, I feel like within y'all's office, y'all could probably have y'all's own podcast to kind of give them what the office talk's all about.
I don't know if that would be safe. Give us a microphone.
just put the age appropriate, disclaimer on there. Just
PG-13.
Yeah. We'll just eat snacks and chat.
Well,
it'll be great.
Snacks and chat.
There you go. You already got the title set, Snacks and Chat. I mean, that could be a really cool logo. So that comes out perfect.
We already know
our listeners,
interviewers that will be on the podcast.
So nothing but cakes, and it has to be around lunchtime because I'm serious. Like my sweet tooth is all high right now because I heard cake analogies after cake analogies. So no, but in all seriousness, thank y'all so much. This is very informative, and I'm so glad we got to get Calley to do a podcast and hop in with us. See, it wasn't so bad. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was great. I had my secret person here.
Well, for our listeners, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Binding Mind Podcast with Bahama Bucks. To continue listening to more episodes, please follow us at Binding Mind Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. We will see you next time.